This India ink tutorial will show you how to create an artwork of a nest from direct observation using brushes in India ink. If you love learning about art, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a weekly tutorial. I have my materials with my ink, my variety of paintbrushes, and I have a nest that I'm going to be painting and drawing from directly. You could always look up images, you could photograph, it just depends on if you're doing this at home or in the classroom. I'm going to start by sketching out the basic composition of my nest. You'll notice there's 4 eggs, the nest is dark brown, and it's attached in kind of the triangle of 2 branches overlapping. So I'm going to lightly sketch with a pencil on my Bristol board. If you're doing this from a photograph, make sure to pay attention to your composition, and then later we'll talk about the values in the light and dark areas. When sketching, I always recommend drawing lightly, of course, paying attention to your largest shapes first, and then also maybe have something go off the page. So think about how close up you want to be to your nest. Think about, do you want your branches overlapping? Do you want your branches going off one side or both sides of your edges of your paper? I'm thinking of this as a still life ink painting, so I am looking at my object directly. If you don't have access to a nest, which I bought this on Amazon for like $3 and then hot glued it to some branches I found outside my classroom, you can do this from a photograph. You could find an image that you like on the internet, but keep in mind a still life painting is expressive. It is capturing something in the moment from direct observation, and there's just nothing that replaces that. The lighting, the way you see it with your eyes can be very different than a photograph because a photograph flattens it. So if you're doing this in the classroom and you have 39 students like me, you might have to have photographs, and if you don't have access to a nest, you might have to use a photograph, and that's all okay. But I do recommend, if possible, draw this from direct observation. The eggs are my favorite part. I love how they interact. I love the speckles on them. That's going to be super fun to ink later. So I am paying special attention to the shapes of the eggs and how they overlap in the nest. Notice that this sketch is quick, it's loose, and I'm not doing any shading at all. I'm going to rely on my ink for that. My final step is to map out this nest area, and this is the darkest part. You can see in the nest all over to the left, it's really nice contrast, really dark and shadowy with the white eggs next to it. Once you have a loose sketch of your composition, it is time to ink and to map your values. I'm going to stop here. Look at my palette to the left. I've marked my pure ink with a little blue tape. That will be jet black, and you can see there are 3 ink wells that I have diluted with water. So that means that I have pre-mixed some values, and to mix a lighter value with ink, you add a little bit of water. If you're new to India ink and you've never played around with value, click the link above and I will walk you through the steps so that you can be successful with this painting. So light is best when layering with India ink. You can't hit Control, Alt, Delete and erase it, and I'm using this really nice bright white Bristol board, and once you apply even the lightest gray to it, you can't get it white again. So even though I know this is the darkest part of my nest, and I'll put a photograph of my angle of the nest that I am painting. Again, I'm doing this from direct observation, but just so you as the viewer can kind of see what I'm seeing. Even though this is black or really dark gray, I'm mapping it in with my lightest grays first. I'm gonna build to my values. I'm not just gonna aggressively go in with my darkest one. It's almost like I'm sketching with my paintbrush and just faintly giving it some gray so that I can kind of build up to those darker values. You're going to hear me say the word value a lot. That's the darkness or lightness of an object. I'm looking at this nest in full color, and it is a simplified color scheme. It's just kind of browns and tans and of course the white of the eggs. If you're a beginner to this, you can take a photograph of what you're looking at, and if you go on your phone, you can edit it. Usually if you have an iPhone, you can do it just right in the photo app, and do like a black and white filter, and that might help you see the values if you're a beginner or have a hard time changing color to value. I know it's kind of tricky because the nest is dark brown, so sometimes you see it as brown instead of gray. So that's a little trick if you're a beginner, is to photograph the composition, get that filter that's black and white, and then you can kind of really see the values broken down for you. I'm doing a darker gray on the bottom of the branch because the angle that I am painting, it has the shadow on the bottom, and the light source, since I'm in my classroom, is overhead fluorescent lighting from the top. You can see now that I have that light gray, I'm going back in with a more medium gray in the areas that are darkest. And again, the inside of the nest, it recedes, it goes in, and you have the shadows of the eggs. So this is gonna end up being pretty dark, if not black in certain areas, but I don't wanna get there right away. I wanna make sure I'm being very careful with how I see the value and don't just do the whole thing black, creating some nice layered grays. You can see I'm doing the same thing. I'm looking for those shadows underneath the branches. And what's really hard for my brain is I want the shadows to be black, but they're not. They're a gray, a darker one, but nowhere close to the dark shadow that's inside the nest or even the dark brown of the nest itself. So I'm a person that likes high contrast. I like black, I like white, and I really have to focus on those medium to light grays and not just jump in. So find and build those grays, don't just jump right into black. It's tempting because India ink creates such a gorgeous, rich black, but layering is going to be key when you're treating India ink as a painting style and not just like inking things in like you would with a drawing where you're outlining, like you might see in certain types of illustrations. I am just itching to get that shadow in there, so I'm going to go ahead and get not a completely black shadow. I do have a little bit of water on my brush. And I am kind of dipping that in there just to get those eggs really popping. And you can see this gives it such great depth already. So again, if you've never done India ink, if you click that link I put in the video at the beginning, I'll walk you through how to create these different values. You can see in my paint tray over there, I have it marked. The blue tape is pure India ink, and then I have little areas of gray I've created off to the side where I'm adding water progressively, so I have some pre-made values I can dip my brush in. India ink is super opaque but easy to work with, very fluid, and so I'm using this really tiny brush just to create that kind of darker shadow underneath the nest. As you can see from the photograph on the top left-hand side, the nest is super, super dark, but I'm not gonna go as dark as I would like to at first, just so I have a little more nuance and value. And keep in mind, not all nests are as dark as this. Some are more light in color. It really depends on what the nest is made out of. I'm at the part of this artwork where I am a little nervous. I have everything sketched out. I have a pretty good sense of value and shadow. You can see I'm focusing on the egg right now. And I'm a little hesitant because once you put down India ink, you can't erase it. So I'm trying to make the darkest shadows be underneath the eggs. Not only is it inside the nest where that's a super dark area, but there's a shadow cast where the nest, or where the eggs kind of sit, and then there's that darker area. So I'm being hesitant with that, just trying to be purposeful. And I dip my brush in water or that lighter gray to fan out any of the India ink that I've already added. I don't want it to be flat black. I do want it to have a really dark gray. And I think what's hard for you to see from this video is all the texture lines I'm trying to put in the nest. A nest is woven, which makes it really interesting to look at, and it makes it really fun to paint with India ink because of all the line designs. You could totally do this with a quill. I'm just kind of practicing some brush strokes. I do recommend practicing, so maybe get out a scrap piece of paper or do this in your sketchbook and practice a variety of lines, focusing on line quality. Some thick, some thin, some curvy, just as many different types of lines that you can come up with. That will help you when you get to your final artwork, really have a comfort level and confidence making those brush strokes. I'm going to build up a few more areas of shadow, a few more areas of dark. Looking at my image there, making sure that it's as dark as possible in the nest, but not neglecting the form. I don't want it just to be flat. I want it to appear as if it's rounded. I want to do my line work, my brush strokes to kind of circular weave around the nest. I am going to procrastinate a little bit with the eggs because once you put India ink on your paper, as you've heard me say, you can't erase it. So I'm kind of building up everything but the eggs at this point. I do love the nest that I chose because it has speckles, which makes it really exciting. And with this work of art, I could have zoomed in much closer to the nest. I could have zoomed out and made it smaller. Multiple angles would make this a really interesting work of art. So maybe even doing sketches before you start to figure out which angle do you find most exciting and most interesting to work with. There really is such a nice simplicity to this nest. I love how it's just black and white. There's something really fun about doing a grayscale artwork, and you can really pay attention to line work. You can really pay attention to composition. So I'm just going back into my branches. I want them to look complete. I want them to have some areas of dark and have that shadow underneath. I do like how light they are. I'm going to try and not overwork the top part of the branch where the light is hitting it. And you could even set up directional lights. You could, take really dramatic photographs of this, or set up a still life where, a light source and some interesting things going on in the background. I'm going to keep my background pretty neutral. I'm going to do a wash of a shadow and some splatter paint at the very end. Once, I don't want to do that until I feel like I'm really happy with all the line work and all the shadows and everything. That shadow that I just added where the branch goes underneath the nest is really fun. That's something I've been looking forward to doing just because it really gives more depth and dimension. It really makes the nest look like it's sitting on top of something. So your branches could be super simple. It could be, they could be really complicated. You could do thick branches. That's a really fun way to show your own artistic style, is how you arrange the nest on branches if you're doing this from direct observation. I'm grabbing my smaller brush again because the line work in the branch, or the nest itself, I want to have some really small fine lines because that's the style of the nest I have. And I'm just trying to pay attention to using the values I created in my paint section over here. So you can see I have some pre-made grays where I added water already. That makes your life a lot more simple because you can just dip your brush in a medium gray or dip it in a light gray. You don't have to worry about dipping it in your cup of water every single time. That's a really helpful tip that I learned from another art teacher. Kind of make your pre-made values, your pre-made dark, medium, and light grays, and that just helps you when you're painting not have to think too hard. And having a system and having a organized paint palette, even if you're just using black, can really help you have confidence and have a successful artwork. I should be pretty close to finishing my branches and adding some speckles on the eggs. I'm the type of artist that I usually overwork everything and I never know when to stop, so I could obsessively be painting these branches for a long time. So let's move on. I'm going to use a bigger brush to focus on some shadows in the background. So again, I'm keeping mine very simple. This is an illustration where I'm just not paying a lot of attention to the background, but I do want to add a shadow to create, as you can see in the photograph, a little bit more of a sense of space. I don't want this artwork, I don't want the nest to look like it's just like floating randomly in space. So giving it a shadow, as you can see, there is one in the photograph, just gives it a little more interest. A shadow is so fun to paint, and it gives the illusion that the nest is on a surface. It's not just floating around. It has some sort of negative space or something happening in the background. And I really do love how the shadow of the branches, you almost wonder, is that a branch? Is that a shadow? That's been really fun to play around with that. And I don't want my shadow super dark. As you can see in the photograph, it is very light gray, especially compared to that really dark nest. So I'm going to make it a little darker than it is naturally, but I want it to be very faint at the same time. So I'm just looking at wherever you would see the cast shadow from the nest, using that larger brush to give it just a little bit of something something. And I'm doing that on the left hand side just to ground it so the background isn't just plain solid white, but it does have a little attention to detail, even though this style is more of a simple illustration. I love watching the paint or the India ink spread in the water. I think doing washes is so much fun, so satisfying. It leaves really great opportunities for doing like blots of like wet on wet, where you add a darker value. It makes a really great surface for splatter painting. Speaking of washes, let's move on to the egg itself. I don't want it to look like a white blob, so I'm gonna put a little shadow. And if you put too much, just get a paper towel and pull. And if you haven't mixed a light value, do that now before you jump in, because you don't want your egg to all of a sudden turn solid black. So I'm trying to give it some roundness, and I'm doing this before I add my speckles. Have your paper towel handy because this is the lightest part of the artwork besides the background. So keeping that really light is going to be key. Making sure that when it dries, going back in to create those dark shadows in those areas will make the eggs look more natural and make it not have like awkward edges, but that really beautiful, nice roundness that we know and love with the shape of eggs. Now I am going to splatter, And this will serve for splatter in the background and create that beautiful speckled like robin's egg look. I do recommend practicing brush control before you do this on your final work of art. I just used a paintbrush and I just smacked it on top of another paintbrush to give it a nice splatter. Now I'm going back in with a shish kebab stick. If you have a quill, you could go in and do that. And am I just adding a few fine lines that are darker because this nest is, ooh, look at that bleeding out. That's actually kind of beautiful. I will say that with India ink, you don't always have as much control as you would like, so embrace the organic quality. If something kind of bleeds or if something splatters, embrace that. That's kind of the beauty of the ink. And I'm just doing a few little details. I don't want to overdo the splatter on the eggs, so I really like that that was just like one or two smacks of the paintbrush to get that effect. I'm really happy with that really dark shadow on the left side of the nest. Although it was not that dark observationally in real life, I think it adds just a really nice pop of contrast. And even though the nest that I was looking at is super dark, I'm going to keep some really light moments on that right curve to give it some more depth. This black ink is making a really nice final touch, and I like that I layered and that I held back and that the nest isn't just like a black blob. So I'm really feeling confident. I'm very happy with the result. I had fun doing it. I think it is a pretty interesting thing to look at. It's great to help study something observationally and pay attention to what you're looking at, but then also give yourself a little artistic freedom to put your own spin on things. All right, even though I could work on this for hours and hours and just totally ruin it, I'm gonna call it finished. So here it is, the India ink nest based on observation. Thank you so much for sticking around and making art with me. And if you're interested in more ink tutorials, check these out. Also, if you want to see what my students are up to in my classroom, find me at Instagram at thatartteacher_Machado and check out my website, thatartteacher.com, for full-length lesson plans, student examples, all for free.